Well, anyways, so thank you for colleague. It's 1 past 1 p.m. here in Bangkok. I can see some people are still joining in, but I would like to welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for the first workshop of the Gender Equality, Disability and Social Inclusion Sensitive Urban Climate Action e-learning module. My name is Sarah, and I'll be your MC for today. So just a little housekeeping before we get started. Kindly keep your camera and microphone turned off unless you are speaking. You're welcome to use the chat function to introduce yourself, share reflections, and make pertinent comments. We will be introducing a dedicated space for posing questions later on. We have simultaneous interpretation for this session, English Thai and Thai English. For those of you who would like to avail themselves, please select the Thai channel. We will also have simultaneous international sign language interpretation, and live captioning is also enabled. So to enable the live captioning, please, at the bottom of your screen, you will see an icon that says more with 3 dots. Please click on that, and then you will be able to click on the transcript and have the transcript on the whole time. So let me start off with a bit of a background on the Urban-Act project for those of you that might not be that familiar. The Urban-Act project strengthens collaborative climate action across 5 program countries: China, India, Indonesia, the Philippines, and Thailand. The focus is on enhancing the capacities of city governments to meaningfully engage in climate change dialogue, action, and implementation. A need assessment was completed in 2023 to identify the potential resources and partners required in a structured training and capacity building intervention. This regional training program fills that needs to strengthen Urban-Act's regional, national, and city capacity building approach and build upon previous and existing project initiatives and approaches. This GEDSI-Sensitive Urban Climate Action module is the 4th online module and the 5th output of the Urban Action Regional Training Program. So today we're very pleased to have all of you with us, and I can see we are around 60 people in the room. And but let's see where we are all coming from. So Jan, if you could change the slide, we will be having, just a ice-breaking exercise. So I would like to invite you to take your phone, and you can scan this QR code that you see here. Or if you cannot scan it, just go on slido.com, and to enter the chat, you will need to put the code 4118979. Please put your thumbs up, and you can use the react function to put the thumbs up to see when you're ready. So if we can move the slide. So I'll just repeat the Slido code, 4118979. All right, so I can see some of you are already starting. Thank you for that. So which country are you from? We have the 5 Urban-Act countries, of course, but I know some of you might also be joining from elsewhere. This is, of course, not a competition. It's just to see. I can see we have a high number from the Philippines, but of course, all of the 5 countries have joined here today, which is really great. Don't be shy. Everything is anonymous here.
And just to let everybody know as well, if you are in the meeting tab, there are 2 tabs on the top of your screen. If you would like to see the results coming into Slido, you just have to select the ESCAP Secretariat's screen and you'll see everybody speaking, as well as the screen that we're referring to and all of the slides that we'll be seeing.
Okay, so I can see that all of the 5 countries are here in the room. Can we go to the next? So what stakeholder group do you represent? Maybe you go back, Jan. There should be another slide before this one. Because the Urban-Act cohort is very diverse, right? So you're all coming from different backgrounds. We have national government here today. We have local, of course, regional government as one of the main cohort of the Urban-Act. But of course, I can see we have also civil society, which is great, also academia. I can see there's a lot of you that belong to other. Okay, interesting.
Me too.
Yeah. Okay, so I can see that also we are a very diverse group in the room, which is great. So the next question, it's open-ended, as to say, but don't worry, it's anonymous. So, today we are going to discuss GEDSI. So what does GEDSI mean to you? You can put whatever comes to mind, as a first thing when you hear GEDSI. What does it tell you? Inclusion, yeah. Justice, empathy, difficult to implement. Well, so this is obviously the space to discuss, and you will hear later on from our amazing panelists, some tools and how to implement. So human rights, recognize diversity, no one left behind, absolutely at the core, right, of the 2030 agenda. We have this motto, leave no one behind. Equity, gender sensitive, acceptance, action, sustainability, rethinking assumptions. I like that. Necessity, yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. It is a necessity, even though sometimes, and I think we will be discussing today and see, what does it take to embed GEDSI into project and programs? Accepting all people, yeah, absolutely. Like accepting diversity. Need to expand awareness and outreach. Indeed. Gender equality, I can see also some of you are putting into the chat. Beyond business case, I like that, not just business, absolutely. And then we will see, and hopefully, after today's first workshop, it will become, easier to grasp some of the, key elements of GEDSI, but also I think you will feel more confident to apply GEDSI element in your own project implementation. Okay, so thank you so much for this. I don't want to take too much of a time. So let me just walk you very, very briefly through the agenda for today. We will start with an overview of the Urban-Act GEDSI strategy. And after that, we will hear from experts on how to apply GEDSI in practice. After the panel discussion, there will be a time for Q&A. And you will be able to post question on the Slido at the same link or using the same code. Before we start, I would like to invite you all to turn on your camera for a group picture. You're also very welcome to, spend 30 seconds or so to upload the GEDSI Zoom background, which was shared to you with you by email, so that we all have the GEDSI background. And my colleague Lisa will be telling us when, hopefully you keep on smiling throughout the day, but, when the picture has
Thank
been
you,
taken.
Sarah. Yes, I'm gonna go old school and take a screenshot of everybody in 3, 2, 1, nice and smiley. If everybody can say GEDSI. Beautiful, that's our first room. Please do switch your cameras on for us to take some beautiful screenshots that will be shared with you after the session as well. It's great to see so many faces. Thank you so much for joining us. We're nearly there. Let's just get that last page in. Perfect. Sarah, back to you. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much, Lisa, for taking the picture. And don't forget that if you're posting on social media, you can use the hashtag at Urban-Act and at GEDSI. We will be putting this in the chat for you to use it later on. So I would like now to invite the first speaker. So Jan, if you could change the slide. So I would like to invite Michaela Lu Andrea Garduz, urban transition analyst at the Institute for Climate and Sustainable Cities, to guide us through the Urban-Act GEDSI strategy. Jan, maybe you can move the slide. Perfect. Ella, the floor is yours.
Okay, so good day everyone. So again, I am Ella and I represent the ICSC. We are part of the Philippine Consortium of the Urban-Act project in the Philippines. So next slide, please. So as Sarah has mentioned, I will be discussing the overview of the Urban-Act GEDSI strategy as well as a quick introduction of the 4R method. So next slide, please. So to begin, would just like to clarify what GEDSI means. So GEDSI simply means gender equality, disability, and social inclusion. So when we talk about the gender part of GEDSI, we simply think of sex, which is biological, and gender, which is sociocultural. But it's not just that. So we also identify the intersex, the LGBTQIA+, and other traditional or cultural factors that affect relationships when we talk about gender. Adding to the talk of GEDSI, we also talk about disability, wherein we include impairments, limitations, and restrictions, which are not just at the individual level, but at the environmental level. So after disability is social inclusion. So social inclusion refers to the process of improving dignity, opportunity, and participation for people who are often left behind. So we stated first when we talk about GEDSI, someone said no one left behind, right? So social inclusion means including everybody regardless of their ethnicity, their race, the language they talk about. So, next slide, please. Okay, so why don't we just talk about the three different categories separately? This is because of the idea of intersectionality. So, GEDSI is not just about addressing individual characteristics like gender or disability in isolation. So, intersectionality is what allows us to understand how these identities overlap and interact. So, how these interactions shape people's experiences of exclusion and marginalization. So, instead of looking at people as just women or just persons with disabilities, we look at the combined realities of like a young woman with disability or an elderly LGBTQIA plus migrant, which each has a unique context that policies and projects must address. So why does intersectionality matter? So intersectionality help us move beyond the surface level solution. So it's not just about counting how many men or women are in the room. It's about shifting power dynamics and ensuring meaningful participation where those who are usually unheard of have a voice and their influence matter in decision making. So next slide, please. So having a strong GEDSI lens allows us to recognize the varying needs of our project's target groups. So this enables us to design interventions that are more equitable and responsive. So one that facilitate participation and break down structural barriers. So next slide. Okay. So for the Urban-Act project, the consortium, so the whole regional consortium have developed a GEDSI strategy, which will help us mainstream GEDSI in all the project components and not make it an afterthought. So the um so it recognizes that gender that does not exist in a vacuum and must be considered alongside other identities. So as mentioned, we have disability and social inclusion. So we also move beyond the binary, including the LGBTQIA plus individuals and recognizing the diversity of lived experiences. So next slide, please. So here we can see how GEDSI was integrated in all the not only at the outcome level of the project, but as well as all the project outputs. And next slide, please. Okay. So when we developed the GEDSI strategy, we also considered or taken into account the 4R method. So the 4R method talks about representation, resources, reality, and rights. So this framework helps guide us our analysis and planning, so ensuring inclusion at every stage of the project development. So for each component, we start with representation. So for representation, as stated there, it talks about who. So the numbers, the data, the demography, who are the users of the urban infrastructure or services. So you can see that we can talk about or ask questions such as how many men, women, and diverse groups use a service or affected by this measure who cannot access these services. And if we don't have the data, we can conduct surveys or census depending on the resources available. Or if it's not available, we can estimate. So following representation is resources. So what resources are available? So how are these distributed and whether the allocation promotes or prohibits inclusive use of services. And when we talk about resources, it's not just about financial. So we also take into account the accessibility of other groups to that service. Next slide, please. Thank you. So following that is reality or why. So for reality, it is about understanding the lived conditions of different groups and why disparities exist. So we ask what structural barriers are in place and are different needs accommodated. So this allows us to pinpoint causes of exclusion and think through how to reshape systems to be more inclusive. And finally is rights or why not. So this refers to regulations or policy frameworks. So we assess whether current laws protect and empower marginalized groups or sectors and whether people are even aware of their rights. So this step ensures that our interventions or projects don't just rely on goodwill. So we need to have a black and white um, thing to support the policies or interventions that we have started and to make it sustainable. So next slide, please. Okay. So for the GEDSI strategy, you have utilized this example So of a urban project park design that has mainstream gender. So here, we can see that for representation, we see a gender gap in park usage among children and adolescents. For resources, this showed that the adolescents dominate certain areas like ball courts, while girls stay near benches or playgrounds. And for reality, this reveals that this is due to social norms and discomfort caused by aggressive behavior. So to address this in the rights, they have referenced policies like Vienna's gender budgeting and park design mandates, ensuring diverse needs are addressed in planning. So next slide, please. So that is the quick overview of the GEDSI strategy and the 4-hour method. So I hope I gave you a clearer picture, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Ella, for this overview. And let me remind participants that you're very welcome to pose questions once we have the Q&A session after the panel discussion. And you can use the Slido. I think some of you might need to mute themselves. Anyways, and please pose your question in the Slido under the Q&A function. So now, without further ado, I would like to call my colleague Ting Ting Chen from ESCAP, Social Affairs Officer at ESCAP, to moderate the panel discussion. Ting Ting, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, for your kind introduction. Good afternoon to everyone. Today, I'm joined by a panel of GEDSI experts. You can see them on the screen already. And may I also ask all the panelists to please turn on your camera if you haven't. Michaela just introduced a framework for looking into GEDSI in urban climate action. With the panelists, we hope to go a bit further and answer 3 questions. How does integrating GEDSI improve urban climate action? How does it improve access to urban climate finance specifically? And how does integrating GEDSI increase the overall sustainability of the projects and improve risk management in the long term? We'll have about 45 minutes for the panel discussion, followed by a Q&A session to be moderated by my colleague Lisa Schimetta. Our time is rather tight, so I count on our speakers to please keep to 5 minutes for each of your response. Now, let me introduce the 4 distinguished panelists. Great to have you all. We have Dr. Anjali Agarwal, co-founder and executive director of Samathian. Dr. Agarwal has profound expertise in accessibility, mobility solutions, and WASH for equity and disability inclusion. She is joining us from India today. Good to see you, Anjali. Dr. Heather Allen, who is a senior consultant on gender and sustainable transport. Dr. Allen has a super impressive background in gender, diversity, and sustainable transport, and she has led relevant projects in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. We also have Mr. Abraham Aful, Senior Project Advisor for GIZ. Mr. Aful advises the C40 Cities Finance Facility and has rich experience in coordinating collaboration among city authorities, international partners, and financial institutions. Last but not the least, we have Ms. Astra R.N. Haas, who is an independent feminist urban economist based in Hong Kong. Her work focuses on supporting cities to develop strategies and governance systems for financing public infrastructure and services, including climate finance and gender-responsive finance. A warm welcome to all of you again. So now let's begin with the first round of questions. And I would like to start with Dr. Anjali Agarwal. I hope that, Anjali, I don't see you on the screen, but please do turn on your camera if you can. So my question is about representation. Representation is one of the pillars of the 4R method, as we just heard from Ella. How can cities go beyond tokenistic consultation and engage persons with disabilities, as well as other groups concerned, meaningfully in the design, budgeting, and monitoring of urban infrastructure? The floor is yours, Anjali.
Thank you, Ting Ting. I hope I'm visible and audible too. So thank you for giving this platform to amplify the voices of people with disabilities in the climate action. And I want to begin with a small case study and then move on to what can be done. We all know the kind of heat wave that in India, in the northern part of India, we have been impacting with. And a woman with sensory and muscular disability, she highlighted that it's being trapped in your own skin. Rising temperatures aren't just numbers on a thermometer, but lived experience of isolation, pain, and the daily negotiation between safety and dignity in a city that seems to forget people with disabilities completely. And this is not acceptable. So, to begin with, heat action is one of the planning that requires a lot of interventions in terms of cooling centers, early warning systems, making no mention of sign language alerts, sensory safe cooling zones, or coordinated support for persons with disabilities during peak heat events. Now, what can be done? We have studies that says that as per the International Labour Organization 2023 report, it highlights that people having some kind of medical conditions which are pre-existing that further put them into risk of heat related illnesses. In India, we are approximately 280 million people with disabilities. It's a huge number. And the intersection of disability is also linked with informal economy and climate vulnerability, creating a perfect storm of marginalization. Now, what can be done is something like very, the kind of systemic exclusion of people with disabilities has already been there. It has to be looked into, and seeing that the largest minority of the world, which is around 20% population, is also the biggest majority. They have the right to be included as part of the solution and not just mere representation. So, born accessibility is required and not piecemeal approach of accessibility in silos or creating islands of accessibility. So, what is required is that the time for symbolic inclusion has passed. We need enforceable rights, scalable systems, and catalytic partnership that center disability in human progress. GEDSI-sensitive and socially inclusive urban planning cannot be effective without the meaningful participation both in planning and decision making of persons with disabilities and other vulnerable groups. Their direct involvement is crucial because they are disproportionately affected by climate change impacts and often possesses unique first-hand knowledge of the specific challenges and needs. And just highlighting what has happened in Thailand very recently, there was floods in Philippines, storms, and in Myanmar and Burma, there were earthquakes. And what happened yesterday in the northern part of India, the whole of village was swept away with the flash floods. What is happening to people with disabilities? Why these hotspots, these blind spots or black spots, whatever we call them, why they are not being taken care of by the city planners, and understanding the accessibility requirements of persons with disabilities, senior citizens, pregnant women, families with with young children, and many other such vulnerable groups. So this is a point where we just don't need only representation. We want to be included in the decision making, in the policies and programs with our lived experiences, and challenging what is there and highlighting what is not been provided that should be given. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anjali. I think you pointed out very well that the impact of climate change is not equal to everyone. That's the reason why we need to look into the realities of different cohorts of the population. And you also talk about we need systematic, scalable solutions for inclusion throughout the full cycle of action. I think we'll look even further into that direction in the rest of our panel discussion. Thank you again, Anjali. And we'll come back to you a bit later. My next question is for Mr. Abraham Aful. Given your experience working with informal waste workers and disability inclusion, could you distill a single actionable lesson that our capstone project teams can possibly apply as they move from concept to implementation? Over to you, Mr. Aful.
All right, thank you very much. Let me just say that
a little bit of an introduction to what we do with C40 Cities Finance Facility is that we help cities prepare finance-ready projects and then link this project to financing. And one thing that become cross-cutting issue is that all projects that are financed by either commercial bank, multilateral institutions, have equity and inclusion as prerequisite or a requirement to access all the needed finance to support project implementation. However, in the context of CFF and the support we provide to cities, we would rather prefer to see equity and inclusion, or GEDSI, as co-creation and shared ownership, in a sense that if, as part of your project preparation, if you do not involve all the stakeholders or key relevant stakeholders, ensuring that their concerns and their interests are incorporated into the project design, you are likely to have challenges during project implementation. And therefore, it is important that we co-create and own the project, whether it's an infrastructure project in the area that we function as CFF, to ensure that there's operational payoff for the projects that we support. And let me bring in a critical example for, for Accra. What we are doing is that we are supporting the city of Accra to prepare finance-ready projects in the area of implementing municipal solid waste source separation and construction of a compost plant. So as part of the support, as I said, it is something that we co-create, and informal waste workers are basically an indispensable aspect of the waste management system in the Global South, in Ghana, in Accra, and everywhere. And therefore, their needs, their interests can never be overlooked. So as part of the city's strategy to ensure that the, the voice of the informal persons with disability were included, they were actually part of the team that designed the project. So they are part of the project, the problem definition, and they are also part of designing the solution. It is not just the informal waste actors alone, but even people with disability. They started with the integration of the informal waste workers. The city gave them an office space at the waste management department, registered the informal waste workers, provided them with some form of health insurance, and also make official announcement. They gave them some embossment on their tricycles that they work with. This is to help the citizens accept the work that the informal waste workers are doing. They get some form of recognition for the fact that they even have an office space at the municipal waste management department, and it becomes very critical as a way of acceptance. Another thing that I would add is, throughout the process, as I've said, it's parts throughout the process. You go through project definition to intervention development. During the project design, you realize that yes, you want to design a waste separation system citywide, and we finish designing the entire process, and eventually we come to a meeting, and the persons with disabilities will tell you that, no, how do you expect me to, especially here I'm speaking specifically for the visually impaired, how do you expect me to work with color code when I cannot see? And therefore it becomes critical. The fortunate thing is that when you involve them, the solution comes from them, because once they know the problem, they are able to guide you to determine locally appropriate intervention that works for all. And then they will guide you by telling you, if you consider designing your waste receptacles, maybe using shape for organic, round shape for organic, rectangular shape for the recyclables, we can use our sticks to determine the shape and then be part of the process. So all that I'm saying is that when you involve these vulnerable actors, from the project definition to intervention development, you end up getting operational payoff. They are parts of the system. They do not resist the implementation of the system. They get their capacities built throughout the system, and they help you implement the system effectively. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Aful. I think the example you gave demonstrates very well the importance of co-creation of solutions. As you said, you have to make them part of the solution creating process, which is key to ensuring that any GEDSI design in the project and any actions under your urban climate action is implementable and also leads to results that the local communities want, and engage these groups concerned from the very beginning of your design. Let me now turn to Dr. Heather Allen about something that is always critical for good planning data. One issue cities often raise is the lack of disaggregated data by gender, disability, income, age, etc., to inform climate resilience planning. Based on your experience, Dr. Allen, are there workarounds or quick wins that cities can use to start making inclusive decisions, even when official data may be limited? Over to you, Dr. Allen.
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me to be part of your panel. Yes, the data issue is always a big problem. But before I come to that, I'd just also like to mention another big problem. And another big problem, certainly in the urban area, is an understanding of the intersectionality, if you want, of gender, climate change, and particularly transport and mobility. It's very often missed in a lot of kind of climate change actions and measures, and I really want to underpin that, because when it comes to a crisis, transport is so important. And it's not just the actual having a transport system, it's actually how you access it and who is able to access it, the confidence around understanding how it works, and the trust that it will work, not only in times of normal life, but also in times of crisis. So I just wanted to add that, because in terms of climate action, I really see that as being very often a missing piece in a lot of international work. But to come back to your question, the reason why we want to collect data is because we want to understand the reality on the ground. So usually cities have some data sets. Most of them are not disaggregated, so it's very difficult to actually extract information which is quite granular from these data sets. But they do have data sets. So really, in my experience, what I try and promote, and I think fits in particularly with your nice framework of the 4 Rs, is you need to collect information that is going to complement the data sets you've already got. So, let's look more at the qualitative side. And it's very, very important to understand how that can really complement your existing data sets. So that is a first step, as it were. And, there's a lot of experience and knowledge about how to run focus groups, how to access those difficult groups that might not be so easy to find the information of. And so it's not just about counting, as Ella said. Ella said it's not just a question of counting. It's about actually understanding what the reality is. So your focus groups really need to be constructed in such a way that you access that kind of information. So you allow women to talk within women. So you need women-only focus groups. You need maybe disability-only focus groups, youth-only focus groups, elderly. But you also need to mix those groups. Because in my experience, what I found, particularly working with men and women around sexual harassment, when you put both men and women into a focus group and you moderate and facilitate that focus group carefully, you get fantastic information from that, because you get the different perspectives. Just looking at it through the sexual harassment lens, what might be acceptable to men may not be acceptable to women. And some elderly women might, or older women might find it more acceptable because they've been through that. They understand what's going to happen, but younger women might not. And those kind of interactions, when they're put into the climate change context and the resilience context, can give you some really important, deep insights, which can complement the quantitative sets that you have, but really give you areas where, as Dr. Abraham said, you need to co-create solutions and measures. Because unless you have that co-creation and ownership at the community level, it's going to be quite difficult to make the policies and measures really resilient and really impactful for what your expectations are.
Thank you so much, Dr. Allen. I think you highlighted quite a number of important points in terms of understanding the realities. It's not only about numbers and accounts. It's essential to understand not only how the needs of different groups may differ, but also about barriers, right? How they affect equity in using transport, for example, and why these barriers happen, and these rely on qualitative data. And it also matters how data is collected to make sure they're accurate in reflecting the different realities. Thank you so much for that. So the previous three speakers have shared some very important perspectives about methodologies for making planning and implementation truly inclusive. All of these would only deliver results when financing is also inclusive. So that leads us to my next question, which is for Ms. Astrid Haas. When thinking about GEDSI and urban climate finance, what are the key considerations you take into account, particularly given that different financing instruments may require different approaches to inclusion? Over to you, Ms. Haas.
Thank you so much, Ting Ting. Thank you to you and Sarah and the rest of the ESCAP team for inviting me to this very important conversation. And I can just very much echo what all the previous panelists have said. So yes, as introduced, I work with cities on this big question of where is the money going to come from? And honestly, in the first sort of years of the work that I've done, that I did in my career, I approached it as a very technical issue, right? Like how you raise money, how you spend money, it's about getting those technical pieces right, and then that's it. And actually, it's anything but. Finance is anything but neutral. Finance is deeply political. Finance is deeply social. And how you raise money and how you spend money has an incredible impact on who benefits and, more importantly, who gets excluded. And so the work that I do with cities now around finance is about actually embedding the understanding that raising money and spending money and how you do it is really important. So I think I think it's really important now to think this through the lens of climate finance. So many of the participants here, I think, went through a climate finance workshop a couple of weeks ago. So they will have heard things like loans and grants and blended finance and PPPs and all the sort of suite of tools that we have when it comes to finance. Each of these tools have very different considerations when it comes to GEDSI. And so I'm just going to outline a couple here, but very happy to take more questions on that. And I think this is important as participants also think of their capstone projects and how they're going to think about implementing their capstone projects and where the finance is going to come from. So there's the adaptation projects, right? And adaptation is usually funded by grant finance. Grant finance is non-repayable, so you get the money and you can implement it as you wish. And so the major benefit of that type of finance is that you can prioritize human-centered and equitable approaches, right? So you can actually build GEDSI in to what you're doing, and you can make that the core of your approach, which is why a lot of adaptation projects are also have very many non-monetized but essential co-benefits, right? They improve health, they improve safety, they reduce time, etc. So it would be wonderful if we could do everything by grant finance, but grant finance is really the very least of the finance that is available when it comes to urban climate finance. The vast majority, over 2/3, is in the form of loans, and loans tend to like mitigation activities because mitigation activities tend to be profitable. And this is the challenge when it comes to GEDSI, because profit and GEDSI, or thinking about inclusion, do not necessarily and by definition go hand in hand, right? To make something profitable, you have to think about how you're going to make your money back, not only just for what you borrowed, but also for the interest, which may mean that you then have to exclude factors like affordability, right? And so very much when you think about mitigation projects in particular, or you think about bankability, we talk this word bankability quite a lot. Bankability, you need to, as policymakers, as civil society, take an even more hands-on approach to making sure that it's inclusive. And it's not impossible by any means, right? This is a lot of the work that I do. And I want to just sort of highlight 3 areas that you can think when you think about bankable projects or bankability, also think about inclusion. The first one is very much in the realm of policymakers. It's regulation. You have the power of regulation. The public sector has the power of regulation. You can mandate universal access. You can mandate gender impact assessments. You can build this into your requests for proposals that the private sector has to respond to. And that this is just something that they have to do. So regulation is really important. The second is, and this is, Abraham mentioned this a little bit about what C40 CFF does, is you can build pipelines, your own pipelines that you want financed from the outset to include your own priorities, including GEDSI priorities, and that's what you put onto the market, right? So it's not the private sector driving your priorities, it's you driving your priorities and the private sector responding through your pipelines of projects. And the final thing is you need to think about the financial instruments that are best for your projects, right? If you are really looking to have a project, which is absolutely fine to have a public and social outcome primarily, then it may not be useful to finance that through something that requires bankability. Finance that through your own balance sheet, through your own public resources. If, however, there are clear revenue streams and you can still regulate those revenue streams to make sure it's affordable, then maybe take a loan, but match the type of finance to what your outcomes are. And even when you are taking loans, make sure you build in GEDSI from the start. Because if we only finance what is profitable, if we only finance what is bankable, then we will leave behind the most vulnerable, and particularly the most vulnerable to climate change. And so what I guess my mantra here, and I'll end on this, is that it's not just about crowding in capital. It's about leadership being at the center of shaping finance to deliver just social and inclusive outcomes.
Sorry, struggling to unmute myself. Thank you so much, Astra. I like that you have outlined actually very clearly the key types of GEDSI actions that different financing schemes are keen to support and consider. I hope that the participants will find this helpful. Let me go back to Dr. Allen for another essential question. What strategies have been effective in framing GEDSI not as a social add-on, but as a core requirement for resilience and sustainability? Back to you again, Dr. Allen.
Thank you so much. Yes, I mean, really interesting to hear what's just been said, because what I'm going to say fits in very neatly with that. You know, we've talked a lot of, you know, about these 4R kind of clusters and buckets, and, you know, the data helps to create the reality of what people actually live. But the representation is really important as well. And when you're thinking about representation, it's not just a one-way street. It is, you know, definitely a two-way street. And this notion also of co-creation is really important. So I'd like to very much underpin you know, the strategies and actions that might be considered at a city level with creating strategic partnerships. They're so important, so effective, and so cheap basically. Not, I won't even say cost effective, because they're very cheap in the, you know, in the larger picture of things. You know, strategic partnerships are so important when it comes to both understanding, you know, the realities. It helps you actually implement what you want to do. It helps guide you. You know, a plan is a dynamic process, and it needs insights at different points along, you know, the planning cycle. And what may have been, what was decided, you know, as a strategic objective remains, but the actual way it's implemented on the ground may need some tweaking. And if you don't have that understanding of the reality, and you don't have the representation through strategic partnerships with those groups that might be left behind, you know, you will not actually get to achieving your objectives that you really want. And there are lots of ways that you can do this, you know, more traditional type partnerships. You also can have like gender panels or inclusive panels. You can have groups of those difficult to access groups, if you like, that act as a sounding board. You can also create these days very cheap and short digital surveys with specific groups, and you can set these up through your partnerships with NGOs and CSOs that really know the realities on the ground. And that also builds trust with the local communities that their voices are being heard. And let's face it, trust is a very important commodity these days. And it also helps with the communication. And when it comes to actually making sure that your policies and measures are going to be impactful, you definitely need to invest in communication. And very often these groups are an asset, because they talk a lot among themselves. They themselves have to share information, whether it's gender or persons with disabilities, youth, the elderly. They talk a lot, and they know the people around them. And so it's very often a very useful way of communicating what the measure actually may, you know, require, what you have to do, what your rights are, the comprehension and the confidence in reacting, in the understanding of what the policy and the project is actually going to deliver. And I think it's a very easy way of getting that communication going and building that trust. And as a last point, I'd like to just come back to two small things. One, you can make a lot of small interventions, but they must be very visible, but they're probably very cost effective, very cheap to actually do. And you can make a few larger transformational interventions, which have a much bigger price tag. So both of those need to have the community level communication very, very strongly embedded in them. And obviously, you know, the one quick win is to do things which are small but visible. So that is one clear message. And the other clear message is bringing back just to what Dr. Haas said. You know, profitability is not necessarily just about financial return. And these groups that we're talking about, the invisible profitability, which are benefits really, are completely undervalued in many projects. And it's really important to think a little bit about that. So although the revenue streams might be clearly defined in some projects, do think about how the benefits to, let's say, different communities can be monetized. Because just to give an example, you know, if you make public transport, women use public transport the world over more than men. And I'm not just saying that they pay more for it, but they use it more because they make a lot of short trips. And this is the same pretty much all over the world. It's maybe slightly different in India, is the only country that I know it's slightly different. But So if you improve public transport, you make women more mobile. Making women more mobile means they can access more economic opportunities. Making them access more economic opportunities, whether it's informal or formal, will trickle down into families. Better food for children, better education for children, a better generation coming up, and more well-being within the family. Fewer financial stresses means that there are fewer family issues. I'll put it like that. So that is what I call an invisible benefit, because it's not directly associated with what you might be doing, but it is nonetheless a very clear benefit for the economic development of cities. So I really, really stress the need for strategic partnerships to be built into the projects.
Thank you so much, Dr. Allen. I think you pointed to a very important point about building or putting GEDSI-related actors into your strategic partnership landscape is actually making the project more cost-effective, especially for building trust and communication. But also another point you made about rethinking how to define outcomes and return on investment from the longer term perspective, and considering the results and benefits for different GEDSI related groups. I think that's very important for making GEDSI a meaningful strategy in climate action. Thank you again. My next question is to help us break down a little further the profiling of population groups concerned in GEDSI. Dr. Anjali, in your view, what demographic or socio-economic cohorts remain systematically underrepresented, and what methodologies would you recommend cities to adopt in closing data gaps for understanding the realities for these groups? Over to you, Anjali. Anjali, you're muted.
Thank you.
Yes, you're audible now.
I'm audible. All right. Thank you so much. So there are a couple of groups which are systematically underrepresented in the climate-related data, research, and decision-making processes, and the development of effective, equitable policies. To begin with, it's the big group of persons with disabilities who are facing a lot of unique challenges during disasters, including difficulties in evacuation and accessing essential services. Data on their specific needs, vulnerabilities are severely limited, and the result in emergency responses and climate adaptations plans are not inclusive or effective for them. The second group is the group of women, which is again a very big group, where mostly in the developing countries, and looking at the climate action in Asia Pacific. They have limited access to resources, education, and decision-making power. And what Heather just said is about the transportation, which is again a big chunk of accessibility in the transportation systems is missing. The poor and the lower income households are another big group, which both informal and formal economics, where they have limited access to resources. They have limited, recovering powers from climate-related disasters like floods, heat waves, and data on the specific vulnerabilities, economic constraints are often lacking, making it difficult to design equitable climate solutions. And finally, there's a big group of youth and senior citizens and super senior citizens, wherein these people are from the long-term consequences of climate change. They are left out of the decision-making processes to shape their future. And the perspectives on sustainable innovation, their concerns about generational equity are not sufficiently represented in the current climate data. So what can be done to close these data gaps? Or simple solutions like strategic partnership is the coin. And it's a word that I would say should reflect through all the strategies, wherein we can build up the gender responsive intersectional analysis, moving beyond a one-size-fits-all approach. This involves conducting detailed gender analysis to understand how climate impacts and policies affect people differently based on their gender, socioeconomic status, other identities markers. I will give you an example in the climate change affects women's access to land ownership and agriculture resources. And for people with disabilities, this is further marginalized, and people with disabilities are discriminated because they don't have access to any land ownership. This requires disaggregating data by gender, by people with disabilities, and other social factors to reveal specific vulnerabilities and opportunities. The second methodology of closing the data gap is having a citizen science and community-led data collection, where we can empower local communities to collect their own data in a very powerful way to fill up this gap and ensure relevance. The citizens science initiative, people can be trained, the residents involving youth with disabilities, because they might have access to different kind of transportation mobility assistive devices, and they can monitor local environmental conditions, document traditional ecological knowledge, and record the impacts of climate change on their livelihoods and overall quality life. The third part can be a qualitative research methods, wherein people with disabilities, women, and even senior citizens can be involved in interviews, focus group discussions, and also studies which can have rich nuances, insights on living experiences, social dynamics, and cultural context of this underrepresented group. Other can be the integration of diverse knowledge system, and this can be involving a lot of incorporating indigenous and local knowledge alongside scientific data. So for example, if I give three cities example in India, to begin with Shimla, which is highly hilly terrain, and Panjim, where this particular project is being taken up, is a coastal area. And the third is Coimbatore, where it is completely mainland and plain, and a lot of heat waves challenges are there. So the elders, the communities, the leader workers, and the organizations of persons with disabilities can be involved in doing the design studies, collecting data, and interpreting the findings. And finally, it can be a very good, robust, disaggregated official statistics which the government and international organizations are committed to collecting, publishing more detailed official statistics and putting it into public domain, and just not keeping it into their offices and systems, because it impacts a lot of people to come out with their own challenges, providing policies outcomes related to age, gender, race, income, and disability status. So I think these are very important targeted policies and data collection areas which the vulnerable population can provide and be part of the strategic implementation strategies as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Anjali. I think you're basically saying the best knowledge of their own realities always comes from the community's concern, which is super important. And I think your response connects very well with the next question for Ms. Haas. Let me turn to Ms. Haas. From your experience, what kind of practical engagement mechanisms beyond public consultations can ensure that urban climate financing considers the lived experiences of groups such as women and persons with disabilities? Over to you, Ms. Haas.
Thank you, Ting. I think I have two main responses to this that build on both what Anjali and Heather have said before me. So the first is, when we talk about engagement, we often jump straight to who's involved in the engagement, which is really important, absolutely. But I think when it comes to also finance, I think we need to take a step back and think about who's deciding on what we're getting engaged on. And this is something that I have had or seen a lot of experience with working with cities, right? So by the time it gets to the consultation phase, by the time it depends on who you're inviting to the consultation, a really important decision has already been made, which is this is what we're going to get consulted on, whether it be the infrastructure that have already been pre-decided for us. And so I think it's important to look at who's making those decisions, right? And there we still have a long way to go. So if you just look at some statistics, right? Globally, less than 5% of city leadership positions are occupied by women, right? So if we think about whether from a policy perspective, it's not generally women who are going to be the ones who are deciding like, okay, this is what's going to go for consultation in many cases. But it's not just in the policy space, it's in the technical space as well when it comes to infrastructure, right? So a study recently that was done in the UK found that most architects are white, male, and childless and able-bodied, which means that they are not they're very structurally and socially removed from the realities of what caregiving is, the realities of mobility constraints for many people, and generally the realities of marginalized urban experiences. But they're the ones deciding on the structures and the structures that we're getting consulted on, right? So I think as a first step, it's to understand who holds power, not only politically, but also technically in institutions such as planning authorities, engineering teams, procurement committees, financial institutions, so that we're not just trying to retrofit GEDSI and through a consultation process at the end, but we're actually putting it through the process. And I think this is really important for finance. The second thing that is really important is understanding how decisions get made on how things will be financed, right? So I mentioned that there's a variety of tools and approaches you can take to finance, and that's all that's all nice and fine. But what the decisions are usually taken by outside technical experts who don't have the contextual or lived experience, using tools such as cost benefit analysis, which have been proven to be very, very not taken into account and poorly positioned to understand context, to understand things of equity beyond economic return. And I think something I want to pick up on that Heather said, which is really important. One thing that we haven't managed for many of our cities, actually the dynamism lies in what we call the informal sector. But those are not captured by formal tools. So for example, work that I do work that I've done is an analysis of how creditworthiness for cities that want to go out and raise a bond, how creditworthiness is assessed. But creditworthiness is assessed purely on formal economies and formal data, of which many cities don't have that, yet their dynamism lies in informality and amongst populations that are there. So we need to also think about how we revise the tools we work with, or at least question the tools we work with, so that we question the outcomes that they're showing us, if we want to then really truly address factors like equity, inclusion, accessibility, and affordability. And I think one final thing to say on the financing, yes, unfortunately, the reality is economic return is usually for many institutions put above all else. But I think actually, from my experience, if you can get the data that Anjali is talking about, if you can start understanding the economic dynamism that Heather mentioned, right? Actually, financing and economic returns exists in GEDSI too, because actually what we're doing is we're financing for the majority rather than the minority. And the reality is if we build infrastructure that is inclusive, even those who may be more able-bodied or may have, less marginalized, are likely to use those infrastructures more as well because they're accessible, right? And so I think it's flipping that economic return equation and actually showing the economic returns can be great in this space too.
Thank you, Astra. I think you're pointing out a few very important points, including if you want a systematic change, we will need GEDSI related groups to be better represented in the leadership, both for financing decision making, but also for the technical capacities, which is super important. For making sure that whatever GEDSI integration has can be translated into results. And also to resonate with what Heather said earlier, to redefine the return of investments in a more GEDSI perspective, it's critical too. Thank you. So now, Mr. Aful, my next question is for you, which I think is a rather practical and the final question. What analytic steps can city teams take early in the project proposal stage to translate gender disparity and social equity risk into quantifiable co-benefits so that lenders view inclusive design as risk mitigation rather than an actual cost? I think it's relevant to the example you mentioned already earlier, but we'd like to listen to you more about your perspective on this. Over to you, Mr. Aful.
All right, thank you so much. At least I've been given the opportunity to give the last feedback. Anyway, I'll be practical here and share what we did as part of our support to the city of Accra. I think it's very important at the early stage of the project design, you undertake a diagnostics of your city. Here, we want to undertake the social diagnostic at the early stage of the project development. One of the strategies or the steps we took in Accra is conducting a social mapping exercise to identify key societal groups across socio-economic and spatial dimensions, those who are likely to be affected by the project, and those who are likely to benefit from the project. This we talk about informal waste workers, persons with disability, women, children, because when it comes to waste separation at the household, there are children, they are aged. How do you even communicate to the children as part of your education strategy and everything? So as I mentioned, the social mapping exercise is a first step. After you've been able to identify all the key groups, then the next step we would recommend is a stakeholder analysis using a power interest matrix. That's what we adopted in the Accra project. And the benefit was that it helped us to assess each group's influence, their interest, and their vulnerability. And it helped us to determine who to consult, who to involve, and who to empower, and at which stage of the project cycle, to ensure that the design or the overall project design is, as I said, locally appropriate. You do not give an education in English to somebody who does not know anything, or you do not use a TV advert to a community that do not even have access to television. So when you involve and you understand the community dynamics, then you know how to communicate, how we can co-create and design solution that satisfy, at least that incorporate aspects of everybody's request. Now, seeing inclusion as not an extra cost, but something that can help you uncover the hidden realities. Let me just use this term, because I'm giving a speaker example. I think as part of the work we did in Accra, before the assignment, there's always the narrative, oh, informal waste workers are the trouble, they dump illegally, they are causing our environment to be bad and everything. So we did the whole analysis and tried to see the contribution of the work of the informal waste collectors within Accra. Here, they used motorized tricycle to collect or to provide waste collection services to households, to institutions. We quantify the fuel they spent. We quantify how much what they get for labor. We quantify how much they pay for recovering the cost of the tricycle they hire for their operation and maintenance. When you put this basic cost together for the number of informal waste workers in Accra, it will surprise you that annually the amount of the work they do, when you translate these basics finances, it's around $20 million annually in terms of contribution. That waste collection service would have been provided by the cities and not the informal. So they are failing, they're providing a service that fills a gap that would have been provided. And that cost is borne by the service they provide, and the city bears no cost. So the idea of involving them, understanding what they do, is critical for you to know where you can leverage to improve services for your citizens, rather than seeing it as an extra cost. As I said, you build their capacity. Now you also understand them to improve upon or support them to improve upon the work that they are doing. As part of the work we are doing, and upon uncovering this, the city now has decided that they would support the informal waste workers to access. In the country, we have what we call MASLOC, small and micro small, micro, medium enterprises loans. These informal waste workers can now access these loans through cooperatives, and then they will be given areas to provide waste collection services. The reason why they are interested in that microloans is that the terms and conditions for the small and medium microloans are favorable compared to what they get for private individuals who buy the tricycles for them and then charge them exorbitant fee for a high price. So basically, that's what I would end. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Aful. It would be wonderful if you could also share those analytical tools you mentioned earlier with the participants. I'm sure it will be practical for them to use. That concludes our panel discussion. I'll now hand over to my colleague Lisa to moderate the Q&A session. Over to you, Lisa.
Thank you so much, Ting Ting. Thank you so much also to all of our experts. Super insightful and so much information for everybody to take away with them. Thank you so much. We do have quite a lot of questions that have come through our Slido. Jan, if you could share. Yep, she's already on it. Perfect. Then we can see the questions that have come in. Now, in the best interest of time, I think we'll go for a couple of questions that have been put in. Just to mention that all questions that we don't get to today, we will come to and bring forward for the second workshop that will be held on the 20th. So please do keep questions coming in. We will keep them and we'll come to them when we have our second workshop. So in that case, I'm going to get straight to it. Now, the first question is actually already addressed to Astrid. The question reads, do development banks at regional levels have some special pipeline which prioritize inclusive projects? This has been upvoted by a few people. If you just bear with us, the screen should be loading soon. But Astrid, are you happy to take that question for now?
Sure. Yes. I think that's an excellent question. So I think the important thing about development bank is the two words in its name is the development and the bank. So ultimately, development banks are also banks, and so they'll also be looking at projects that have various forms of return. But the development mandate in their nature will mean that they'll have more opportunities to be able to prioritize inclusive outcomes. Now, one of the things that I think is really important that development banks provide, and this is usually within their, many of them have their own project preparation facilities or technical assistance facilities, is that they can help with this calculation of economic and financial return that takes into account inclusivity. So I have seen banks do that. I have seen banks being able to development banks being able to work around understanding how to include development outcomes, which is in their name. But I will say that one of the challenges with projects to development banks, including regional development banks, is ticket size. So they're also looking for very big projects. And so often a time, for example, where you are thinking about a smaller project, maybe like an urban park or everything, or those types of things, it may not be best suited. So I just come back to the final point is that in approaching development banks or in thinking about development bank financing, in making sure that you're matching what the project is that you are doing to what their needs are or what they're looking for as well. Once you've sort of done that, then they are very well positioned to help you shape the project and answer the questions when it comes to being able to look at inclusion within economic and financial analysis.
Thank you very much, Astrid. That's overall a relatively outcome then in that case. Now let's just get to our second question, which also is labeled for Heather this time. How do you decide which groups to include during consultation? Women, men, gender diverse people, age groups, people with disabilities, etc. You did mention a few of these in your answers before, but if you could give an overview of maybe how you decide which groups to include in consultation.
Sure, and I'll also touch maybe on another question I saw about social perceptions. So, I mean, let's look at it. Data collection anyway is expensive. but household surveys are super expensive. So it's all relative. You need, in fact, if you're going to embed inclusivity into your project and you want to have the impact that probably your objectives reflect, you have to invest in a large number of consultations with those, put them, difficult to access groups. Otherwise, it will not be inclusive. But this should also lead on to your development and your strategic ideas around partnerships that will deliver, you know, communication on the ground. They will deliver insights about the local knowledge. They will deliver actually comprehension of the whole project and trust in the local governments. So those are tremendously valuable benefits. So don't skimp on the number of focus groups, qualitative ways of collecting data. It is really important, and actually in the bigger picture of things, it is very, very cost effective. And just touching a little bit on the social perceptions about women from whom? You know, let's look at the facts. Women are at least 50% of the population. Everyone has a mother. Do you not think that that is important? There's no way that you actually, if you come back to the realities of things, it's just about changing a little bit the mindset. Everyone wants to have inclusive cities, but you need to really change the mindset to actually understand what inclusiveness means. And it's all about intersectionality as well.
Thank you so much, Heather. That's super insightful. And yes, intersectionality is, you know, at the top of our topics, hopefully always. Now, for the best of time, thank you so much for all of your questions that you've been putting through to Slido. Like I said, we will come to those in our next workshop, especially the one where the question was asked about examples. So thank you again. Now, what is coming next is a graphic recording that we have today as a summary of our key takeaways. So let me please introduce to you Desiree May Llanos Day. She's the founder of Tofu Creatives and has done a beautiful graphic takeaway recording for us. So please, without further ado, Desiree, I'm handing over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'll just walk you through a quick visual journey of today's discussion. So we started asking participants what GEDSI means, and people shared that it's about rethinking assumptions, no one left behind, and this is a platform for learning. And then Ella walked us through some of the components of GEDSI and also asking why intersectionality is important, and it's about shifting power dynamics and meaningful representation. She also pointed out how it's how this is part of the Urban-Act GEDSI strategy and the outcome level, which includes policy integration, representation, facilitating contribution, and having a GEDSI lens. She also walked us through the 4R method, which includes representation, asking who are the users, the resources, what resources are available, who has access to it, the reality, looking at why, assessing living conditions, evaluating power dynamics, and the rights, why not, identifying legal situation and analyzing its impact. And over to our fireside chat, Miss Angeli talked about how important it is to look at the lived experiences and also the inequalities that come with this, and how we need systematic, scalable solutions, looking at what is needed, looking also at citizen science community-led data, and how this is important to have public access to it. And then Mr. Abraham talked about how inclusion drives co-creation, shared ownership, and how it facilitates implementation, and how they were able to map the social diagnostics of the city, looking at the power analysis of stakeholders, and how these tools were able to make them understand how to best support these groups and leverage resources. And then Heather talked about the importance of the climate, gender, and mobility intersection, and how focus group discussions are important in understanding the reality, looking at the needs, barriers, how data also helps create reality, and how it's so important to have strategic partnerships and trust building. And then Astrid talked about how finance is not neutral, and some of the areas that policymakers could look at would be first creating the policy, looking at the pipeline priorities, having these financial instruments, and how leadership is so crucial in shaping finance. And it's also important to ask who is deciding, how are decisions made, and to show the economic returns for GEDSI. So that's the big picture of today's discussion. It was my honor to listen to all of you and illustrate this big picture. And I pass it over to the closing.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Desiree. What a fantastic summary. Hi, everyone. You haven't seen me here today, but some of you may recognize me. My name is Amelia. I'm here from the University of Melbourne supporting the Urban-Act team. And I'm going to be walking you through what you can expect for the second workshop. But before I do that, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our panelists, Anjali, Heather, Abraham, and Astrid, and their wonderful moderator, Ting Ting, for their presentations and very informative discussions. And of course, a big thank you to Ella for walking us through the Urban-Act GEDSI strategy, and to our interpreters, Naam, Razak, and Britta, for your excellent work today. Before we close out the session, I think this is a good time to take a minute to reflect on what we've learned today. And we can think about what we saw with Desiree's figure just then as a really useful summary of those key takeaways. I'd like to ask all of you to just take a minute, go into the QA section of the Slido, which you can access in the chat function there. And I'd like you to add in that Q&A section one takeaway from this workshop. It can be just a few words, a short sentence, maybe just one key word. What's one thing that you took away today? I'm going to give you 1 minute very quickly to do that now. Perhaps Jan, could I ask you to go back to the Slido page for me with the Q&A? Okay, lovely. I'm seeing a few come up on my Slido page. We've got holistic, finance isn't neutral. I love this. Okay, just in the interest of time, I'm going to encourage you to keep putting in your reflections into the Q&A. And you'll be able to watch them pop up on your own devices. I might ask Jan if you could please flick back to the closing slide for me. I'm going to keep moving forward to make sure that we finish on time. A reminder that this workshop today is just one part of a two-part series. The next workshop will be held on Wednesday, the 20th of August, 2025 at 1 p.m. Bangkok time. So this same time in 2 weeks. I hope that we'll see both our panelists and all of our participants here again for the second workshop. In that workshop, we're actually going to flip the format, and we're going to ask some of our Urban-Act cities here to present their capstone work and receive feedback from our lovely panel of experts. In preparation for this workshop, you have 2 pieces of homework. First of all, I would ask all participants to please complete the course quiz. You can scan the QR code here on the screen, or I'm just going to add the link to the survey in the chat. Please complete this survey prior to the next workshop. This quiz is designed to help consolidate what we've learned today and understand how to strengthen GEDSI aspects in urban climate projects using the 4R method. So the quiz is going to walk you through a hypothetical scenario where you'll be asked to consider who the users are, what the resources they have available, why the situation is the way it is, and why not shape policies to address that situation. So that's walking through the 4R method. The second piece of homework. Each country team needs to nominate at least one speaker to present their capstone projects at workshop 2. All of the speakers who are nominated will need to fill in a slide template and send it to us no later than Friday, the 15th of August. We'll follow up with a template and further instructions for the speakers, but please ensure that you nominate the speakers by the end of this week. So, as a very quick recap, you have homework. Please make sure that you fill in the quiz before the next workshop. And if you are speaking, please make sure that you send us your slides by next Friday. Okay, that's 5:30. That brings us to the end of the workshop. Thank you everyone for your participation. We really appreciate your time. Thank you again to the panelists, to the interpreters, to our wonderful organisers. And we look forward to seeing you all in 2 weeks at the next workshop. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.